Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome you once again to the airwaves of Salam Media on the various platforms. For those who are watching us visually tonight and also on the audio broadcast, we welcome you to the show. And it's once again Wednesday nights with myself, Inayet Wadi. Now, the topic we're talking tonight is an extremely important topic because for a very, very long time, we know that there has been a leadership vacuum in the Muslim world, and particularly looking at the Muslim countries, looking at the leadership in the Muslim countries, and that leaves much to be desired. But the key issue here is to try and unpack and try and understand how the leadership has evolved over a period of time. And we see it even until recently with the death of Sheikh Khalifa bin Zayed Al Nahyan and being replaced by Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan as well. We see it in Saudi Arabia that we know Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman is obviously the de facto leader of the country. And just looking at the Arab world in particular, how the Arab world has evolved as far as their leadership is concerned. And also with the death of Sheikh Khalifa in the UAE, we've seen world leaders descending on the United Arab Emirates, offering their condolences. But we've never seen similar sentiments expressed when we've seen how Sheikh Mohammed Mursi was removed from power. So again, the hypocrisy of the West manifesting itself in terms of their recognition of a Muslim leadership right across the entire world. And to take this discussion further, our panelists tonight, we are joined by Professor Nidal Sakr and also Mazhar from the United Kingdom. And I'd like to welcome both our guests, our panelists this evening to the show. Firstly, on top of the screen, I see Professor Nidal Sakr. Professor Nidal, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. As always, welcome, and we do appreciate you taking time out and joining the panel discussion tonight.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. It's a pleasure to be with you always, brother.
Jazakallah khairan, and also to you, Brother Mazhar Khan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome and much appreciated.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And like I say, always a pleasure to be on your show tonight.
Yes. Now, Professor Nidal, I just want to talk about Muslim leadership and how Muslim leadership has evolved over a period of time. Obviously, we go back over 1400 years. We look at the life of Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We look at the Khulafa Rashidin, and over the years, the various dynasties we've seen right until the Uthmani Khilafah, and thereafter we started seeing somewhat of a shift, somewhat of a change in leadership, and this was a very, very defining moment for the Muslim Ummah, but for Muslim leadership at large.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Brother, thank you for the very important start of this program. Let's be mindful, first of all, that when we talk about nations and peoples and people who take prominence in history in terms of dominating the world and the whole concept of superpowers and the reign on global affairs and so forth, we are talking about projects. We are talking about projects that are value-based. Some they call them cultural or civilization projects, where a group of people, they think that basically they have an agenda, and that agenda either serves their own purpose or it serves other people's interests. We have the Islamic Project that contrasts with all of those. The Islamic Project is basically a faith and value-based project that is based on the best interest of mankind and all creation, regardless if they are Muslims or non-Muslims. Muslims view themselves as the guardians to Allah's way of life, and Allah, as the creator of everyone and everything, is intuitively the one and the only one who knows what's best for everyone. So Muslims assume that their role in life and on this earth is basically to serve Allah's purpose and Allah's interests in basically fulfilling the best interests of His creation, plain and simple. Well, guess what? Muslims are the only ones that are unique and that they can claim exclusive, actually, credibility and qualification in serving that purpose, which carries the good and the best interest to everyone, whether it's Muslim, non-Muslim, whether it's a human, animal, or any form of being. We have throughout the history, we had other projects, since eternity, and all the way coming to our to our day. And those projects did not have that universality of interest. Those are basically projects that have very narrow interests, that they saw their own interests or the interests of their own people or their narrow agenda as something that's at clash or at odds with everybody else's interests. So we saw that those are quote unquote self-centered or devious or narrow-minded projects, that they all came about to try to serve a group or interest of some group the way they see it, and quite often at the interest of everybody else. That's why the demise of the Khilafah about 100 years ago was a loss to mankind, was a loss to all creation. It's not only Muslims that lost by losing their leadership and reign over world powers. As a matter of fact, all creation, all forms of creation, the trees, the global environment, everything, the water resources, everything basically lost because that value-based that's prescribed by Allah, the system that of which that Allah has prescribed, has been absent and was replaced by devious and projects that were fueled by greed, by self-interest, by racism, by bigotry, by hate, and so on and so forth. That's why immediately after the first the demise of the Muslim of the Muslim Khilafah, the Ottoman Empire, we end up having the First World War, the Second World War, where scores of up to 60 million people were massacred, killing each other. Some of them even ascribing to the same faith. Then we have, of course, what you call Muslim world or post-Khilafah Muslim world or Arab world. That's an extension to basically all what we have in those warring parties all over the world. We know that none of the leaders of so-called Muslim leaders or Arab leaders has even full control and authority over the pants that he is wearing. They would not survive unless they are backed by somebody else. One of the advantages of Donald Trump, that he exposed those Saudis and the oil sheikhs, that if it wasn't for the U.S. protection, they would not even have a pillow to sleep on, let alone other things. So basically, what we have right now is that we have regional powers, so-called, and we have global powers, and the world affairs right now, of course, everybody's fighting with everybody. So it seems that things are shifting in a very rapid way. But the way that this affects the Muslim world and the Middle East in particular is that we're seeing the backing for most of these regimes, the traditional backing, which is the U.S., really does not have much time or interest or see them as feasible to continue investing in. Israel among those groups, they're finding that basically right now their stench is just much more than what the world wants to handle at this point. So Israel is becoming a burden and liability as well to the US and to the Western world. Those Arab leaders, along with Israel, they got together and they said, you know what, let's try by joining forces together, try to serve ourselves and each other. So you have this Mohammed bin Zayed. Mohammed bin Zayed, he basically froze his brother practically since before even Zayed died, the father. And we know that he's been the de facto ruler of Emirates for all of these years. There are reports that actually even his brother has been in the morgue for at least two months or 2 weeks, but that doesn't really matter. Mohammed bin Zayed basically is the devil right now in the world affairs. He's the one who's behind all the massacres and the turmoils in the Muslim world. We know his projects in Libya has failed, and his project in Syria has failed, his coup in Turkey has failed, his project in so-called Israel supporting the Israelis has failed, his project in Mali has failed, Central Africa has failed. Inshallah, his project in India will fail, his project in China will fail, and Burma will fail. And for him to come to power right now as being quote-unquote the president of the UAE, which is no longer exists, actually. UAE right now is just basically a hotbed for prostitution, for Russian mafia, for anything, for dirty money laundering, for extortions, for everything. I don't see this as being significant in any way. The significant thing is what's happening in Palestine. Do not get confused by what's happening around the world. Yes, there is war on Russia on Ukraine, between Russia and the Western Bloc and so forth. Keep your eye on Palestine. Palestine is actually the future of this world and how this thing is going to come out, inshallah. And things are looking good with the, I still call it the martyrdom or the murder of Shireen Abu Akleh, and a Palestinian icon. I think that actually exposed to the world how things are going and the reality and the true faces of Israel and its allies in the region. And inshallah, it won't be long before things get back on the right track.
Jazakallah khairan so much for that, Professor Nidal. Mazhar, just your thoughts on how Muslim leadership has evolved over a period of time.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Like the professor very correctly spoke about the historical aspect, about the demise of the Ottoman Khilafah, and how things really changed from that point. And we are still suffering from that. Today's current affairs is intrinsically linked back to those events, whether we talk about Palestine or we talk about these false states that exist in the Arab world and these leadership that exists in the Arab world. All of them draw their heritage and their lineage from that event. And Sheikh Taqiyuddin Nabhani, an eminent scholar from Palestine, he said the existence of the Israeli Zionist state is just merely a shadow of the Arab governments, meaning that this blot on the landscape only exists because these fake Arab states exist. And what he was trying to say is that if the Muslims can get rid of the fake Arab states, then this artificial Zionist occupation by itself will remove. Why? Because they need the Arab states. So when the first Zionist president, made an off-the-cuff remark that our first line of defense are the Arab rulers, I think nobody's left in any doubt today that that is the case, that this entity cannot exist had it not been for the support of the Egyptian government, the Jordanian government, the Gulf governments, and the Saudi government. All of these give it protection and oxygen to exist. Now, all of these states that came into existence after the demise of the Ottoman Khilafah and all these artificial states that were born, they only serve two purposes. And I don't think you have to be a political analyst or you don't have to be an expert in history to understand that these states only serve a very narrow personal interest of the ruling elite and also the interest of the geopolitical needs in the area for the master states, whether it's America, whether it's Europe, or these entities. So they only service that. And that has been consistent. So I would say that these regimes haven't evolved. The leadership in the Arab world hasn't evolved. They've been very constant in servicing their own greed and servicing the interests of America or Europe. So if you look at, we could talk historically, people forget when we talk about the Gulf. If you look at the Gulf states, if you look at, for example, Qatar, if you look at Kuwait, if you look at what they call UAE, Bahrain, Qatar, and UAE were officially only independent in 1971. Direct colonial rule in this Gulf region didn't end until 1971, where Britain directly regulated these. And Britain still regulates these countries. I mean, a lot of people don't know how close and intrinsic the tie Britain still has to some of these Gulf states. So, for example, if you look at Oman, there's a chap who passed away a few years ago in Britain. His name was Brigadier Timothy Landon. A lot of people haven't heard of this guy. This is the guy that was sitting in the Jeep with Sultan Qaboos when he was instructed to do a coup against his own father because he wasn't doing what Britain wanted him to do. So they got his own son from Sandhurst to go to Oman with Timothy Landon in order to remove his own father from power. Now, Sultan Qaboos, and there's lots of stories we can talk about that man, but we'll leave that for now. But Sultan Qaboos himself, Timothy was almost his advisor in how to run the country. And every year, Sultan Qaboos would give him $1 million for a birthday gift. And every deal that he cut in Oman through Timothy, he would get a cut. And he became one of the most wealthiest men in Britain. In fact, his son is the wealthiest young person in Britain. He inherited 200 million pounds from his father when he passed away. And he's a personal friend of Prince William and Prince Harry. So this is the kind of people that they mix with, and these are the kind of people they are. So these government are not only directly instructed how to govern from here, but they service the West. So, for example, we know when they had the financial crisis in 2008 and the global capitalist system was on the brink liquidity was given by the Arab regimes to the Western banks. If you look at the property portfolio in Britain, billions of pounds are spent by the Arab rulers in buying property in Britain. They invest millions and millions of pounds in football clubs in Europe. And they service the needs of the European powers, and they help them. Now, if you go to the other side of the Gulf, Pakistan is in dire need of liquidity, but they don't give them any money. The Muslim world in Africa, whether you look at Somalia or Egypt and these places, they're in desperate need of liquidity. The Gulf don't help them with any money. So you can see that these governments in the past supported and helped the needs of the Western powers, and they continue to do that to this day. And in the process, they themselves personally get very wealthy, but for the sake of Islam and the Muslim Ummah, they have got nothing to offer in terms of leadership, and they have offered nothing in the past, and they will offer nothing in the future. And it's becoming clearer and clearer, even to the lay people, that these regimes do not represent their people, they don't represent Islam, and they are only there to serve a neo-colonial agenda, which Muslims now really need to, focus on and think about how do we remove this and move back to our natural state. Because as the professor quite correctly said, we are the caretakers, not of just the Muslims, of the non-Muslims, of the planets, the ecology. So when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created Adam alayhi salam, he said, Inni ja'ilun fil ardi khalifa, when he said to the angel, that I have created Adam and his progeny as the Khalifa, as the caretakers of this planet. And because the Muslims have moved away from that, and again, Professor quite rightly highlighted this point, when the Muslims were removed from the political stage, we see a calamity take place on the world. So the First World War and the Second World War only happened after the demise of the Islamic political entity, which created a balance on this earth. And we have had constant warfare and occupation in the last 100 or so years. And we cannot take away from the equation that these 100 years have been the most bloodiest years in entire human history. And what coincides with that is the absence of a Muslim political entity on earth.
Yes, Jazakallah for that. And I think obviously reiterating what Professor Nidal Sakr has said when we talk about the universality of interest, and more importantly, when one talks about the narrow agenda in serving of interest. And as you mentioned, the bloodiest war. But now also, Professor Nidal, when one looks at leadership in general, and looking at Saudi Arabia, let's take Saudi Arabia as an example. Saudi Arabia has had 7 kings until now, from the time of King Abdulaziz through to King Faisal, Fahad, Abdullah, and latest obviously being King Salman. And just to understand the leadership mentality and the psyche of these leaders in serving this narrow agenda or this neo-colonial agenda.
Well, Saudi Arabia is an example where when things go wrong, they just keep getting worse. Basically, like it's a land where basically Prophet Muhammad has started the Islamic State. Nobody has claim to it except whoever claims allegiance to Prophet Muhammad and his message, and what Allah prescribed and what he prescribed for us. So basically, like you had a tribe that has no constituency or legitimacy or history taken over the country, and this is a product, just like Brother Mazhar was saying, it's an outcome and product of the demise of the Islamic State or the Ottoman Empire, and it came with one purpose only, which is to serve the colonial project. When we say colonial project, we're talking about Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Emirates, Israel, and so forth. These are all colonial projects. Yes, they have Arab flags, they have Abdullah and Muhammad as kings and leaders, but these are colonial projects that are established to serve the colonial interest. That colonial interest at some point was basically dominated by Britain and France, and then when they got weakened after the Second World War, the US took over, inherited that colonial regime, and it's still, it's the same nonsense, Saudis are basically a Bedouin tribe that are nobodies, and just like the colonials always pick the nobodies. Let's remember that they would not go to a respectable dynasty or people like that are or a family that is known for fearing Allah or serving the people or having knowledge. No, they went to the nobodies. No, those are the house slaves that served the colonials when they were in direct control and occupation of our land. And then, all of a sudden, like all of these house slaves called the House of Saud, for some reason, they turned against one another. And then you had Mohammed bin Salman. Mohammed bin Salman is the dictator of the dictatorship. So before him, all of these so-called 17 kings, they were all dictators. But he came to bully even the dictators. And his agenda, of course, is bluntly Zionist agenda. Him and Mohammed bin Zayed are basically two sides of the same coin. They're all basically, the brother Mazhar was talking about that Tony, the British dude, who was like de facto ruler of Oman. When we have de facto ruler of the Gulf right now is named Tony Blair, and they're both Tonys, which is like quite an irony. Tony Blair, of course, is also like in service of the Zionist project as well. And just like I said, like right now, they wanted to have complete departure. Before that, Saudis were claiming to at least be an Arab country that stands for the like the primary Arab and Palestinian and Muslim cause, which is Palestine. They claim to be the servants of the holy sites and so forth. Well, that became a burden to them right now in the New World Order, where Israel is supposed to be the superpower in the region, and instead of them like serving Israel, they think that Israel right now is strong enough to serve them or to protect them. So they're right now they're taking the payback from Israel to protect their regimes. Well, they did wrong because Israel cannot even protect its own. And we see, alhamdulillah, what we've seen a year ago from the sword of Jerusalem, and what we see from the Palestinian heroes, whether it's in Jenin, whether West Bank, whether 1948 or Gaza. Now Palestinians are dictating their terms on what's happening inside Palestine. Inshallah, on the timing when this whole nightmare called Israel is going to be over. We don't have a vacuum in the Arab world leadership, quote unquote, because we never had leadership. So the vacuum has always been there since 100 years ago. Do we see any end in sight where something that would emerge and we would have like a leadership? I believe that the Muslim Ummah is all one Ummah anyway, so I do not believe there is such thing as Muslim world and non-Muslim, or Arab world and non-Muslim, non-Arab world. We see signs that Muslims, alhamdulillah, are being persecuted. When Muslims are persecuted, is a sign that the dawn is near. We know that always the darkest hours are right before the sunrise. The Muslim Ummah very much is going through some of the darkest hours, but we see hopeful signs everywhere. We see people in many parts of the world, alhamdulillah, finding that Islam is an identity that we cannot exist without, let alone having any respect among the nations. Something will give in. I see basically Mohammed bin Zayed coming to power as his days in office are near their end. I see Salman, or Mohammed bin Salman, feeling that he's having right now uncontested rule over Saudi as a sign that his days are numbered. I see that those Israelis right now killing Shireen Abu Akleh and killing Palestinians on a daily basis, and with whatever that's happening right now in world affairs and Ukraine and so forth, I see that the days of Israel, so-called Israel, are numbered. The days of Sisi, of course, we all are far from being numbered. Egypt right now is basically a joke in terms of like resources and poverty and hunger and everything else. So, the situation that we have right now is extremely awkward situation. There is no way that the situation would last for long. Islam always comes back as the solution, and just like, we've always known what people have known. I believe that even the humanity right now is coming to realize that with the demise of the Islamic State and all the turmoils and the last 100 years being the bloodiest in human history, I think history is going to give Islam justice and the Islamic State justice, and people, once again, they're going to start like look at the Muslim umbrella of justice, equality, and Allah's way of life as the way to go, inshallah.
Inshallah. Yes, and also, Mazhar, if you could unmute your mic now. At the image that the Muslim leadership has portrayed throughout the last 100 years is, when one looks at it, they've portrayed this image of weakness, actually, because this is exactly what they've done, because, they've been brainwashed to such an extent to accept anything that is Western as sacred, a model that needs to be emulated. And this has been the trend. We've seen it throughout in terms of their governance, in terms of their political philosophy, in terms of the economic philosophy, and also as far as foreign policy, foreign relations. And this obviously has been a major sign of weakness as far as the Muslim leadership is concerned.
Yes, very much so, Brother Inayet. The weakness is not just political and material, it's an intellectual weakness they have, because they've got nothing to offer. They have no vision. They only exist in order to serve the West. And they have no strength in themselves. What do I mean by that? The British are very sneaky and very clever. When they removed the Islamic authority in the Middle East, they carved out weak states that are inherently weak, and they imposed on them weak leaders. What do I mean by that? So in Lebanon, they put the minority, they put the Christians in dominant positions, even though they were a minority in the overall region. If you go into Jordan, they got a tribe from the Hijaz to appoint them as kings. So they're not natural to that area. They don't have no natural support. If you look at Syria, they put the Assad family in power, which are like Druze. They're not even Muslim. In Palestine, they put the European Yahud in power. So they put people in power who have got no natural support in the land they are ruling. So they always have to look to help from the Europeans and from outsiders. And this is a way in which they maintain their influence in these regions. So they are weak from that point of view. And they know that they need the help of outside powers in order to stay in power. So what they do is, in order to maintain their power, they try to convince the people themselves that we are weak states and there's nothing we can do. We are helpless. So Egypt is a mighty state with a large army. Yeah, the Zionist state would not be able to fight them. But they have never, ever fought the Muslim armies for the cause of Islam. They have fought pretend wars, staged wars in order to achieve some political aims. You know, I think it was the 1973 Yom Kippur. Was it the Yom Kippur War, 1973, when the Egyptians regained the Sinai? The Egyptian army thought, well, this is very easy. And they started to proceed into occupied Palestine. And there's reports from an account that the Yahud in Jerusalem were packing their suitcases. And there are reports from people in the Egyptian army that the Egyptian Anwar Sadat, the president, ordered his own air force to bomb the army to stop them from going into Palestine and removing the Israeli state. So that is an indication. When the Yahud went into the Golan Heights, the Syrians evacuated the Golan Heights before the Yahud even occupied it. And the army on the hill, when they were on the Golan Heights, they will tell you that we heard reports on the Syrian radio saying that the Zionists had occupied the Golan Heights. He goes, we were sitting on it. There was no Zionists there. So there's lots of evidence to show that all these wars were staged. They were never fought by Muslims for the cause of Islam. They were fought by Arab rulers for the benefit of some geopolitical interests by America and stuff. So these regimes have never fought the Zionists, and they try to convince the people that we are weak. So we can't fight them. We have to make peace with them. But alhamdulillah, because of the events which have unfolded over the last 2-3 decades, we find that the only thing that resonates across the Muslim world is Islam. So now anybody who wants to come into power has to give slogans to Islam in order to get into power. When they get into power, they're not able to do anything, but they try to appease the Muslims by doing superficial changes. And they create these false dawns, because the only thing that the Muslims are motivated or that resonates with them is Islam and the unity of the Ummah. So even when Gamal Nasser came, he had to talk about unity. Even though he was a secular leader, he had to talk about unity and the liberation of Palestine. And the masses supported him. But we realize now he was not only just an appointed CIA agent, he was a paid CIA agent, you know, as Miles Copeland documented in his book, The Game Player. If you look at Khomeini when he came to power, right? Again, Islamic slogans, Islamic, rhetoric in order to appeal to the masses. Even globally, his reach was even amongst the Sunnis around the Arab world. People supported him. Why? Because he spoke against America and for the cause of Islam. Today, it's also well known that that was a manufactured coup in order to keep the communists out of Iran. And they allowed Khomeini to take power, but he was under strict understanding that you will not go against the American wishes in the international arena. So we have these many false dawns. We had Bashir in Sudan, and we have these false dawns, and because they appeal to Islam. So the Ummah responds to Islam, but it doesn't respond to these Arab regimes and stuff for their nationalistic slogans. And that's why, like the professor mentioned, these are positive signs that this Ummah is indeed one Ummah, and it wants the resumption of the Islam. But they have been betrayed, not just by the rulers, that we know the Ummah has been betrayed, but they have been betrayed by certain, prominent celebrity scholars who justify these regimes and support these regimes, and that confuse the masses. So it's no surprise that the Prophet ﷺ said in one narration that there is something I fear for my ummah more than the fitna of Dajjal. And when he was asked, what is this? Rasulullah ﷺ said, the misguided and the astray scholars. Because the Muslims, they don't listen to non-Islam for guidance. They listen to Islam for guidance. Now, if the people they trust are misguided, this is what causes a problem. And that's why the Saudi regime has been able to stay in power, because misguided scholars, and only a few of them, because the good ones are not prominent, and the good ones end up in prison. But these are the ones who are misguiding the Ummah. But again, this can only last for so long, because even now, the lay people in the Muslim Ummah are beginning to realize, the game is up for the rulers and the game is up for the West. They don't really have power over the Muslim Ummah. We have many more cards in our hands and in our favor than the kuffar do. And just a very small example to finish with, I think I might have mentioned on one of your previous shows, that America after 9/11 was the most powerful state on earth. We were in a unipolar world. Nobody could stand up to America. So when they invaded into Afghanistan, they thought this was going to be a walk in the park. But after 20 years, after spending $1 trillion, they had to leave without achieving their objective. Yeah, they had to leave without achieving the objective, number one. Number two, even though America was so powerful, it could not enter into Afghanistan without the unstinting support of Pakistan. So that just goes to show, if Pakistan hadn't helped the Americans, they would never ever have been able to go into Afghanistan on their own. So from this, we know that if the Ummah stood together, we have more positives in our hands than we actually bargained for. And there's more fear and worry on the side of the kuffar, because they don't have the sabr, they don't have the perseverance, they don't have the tawakkul that we have. And if the Taliban can show that they can wait 20 years and defeat the Americans, that is a quality the whole Ummah shares. It's not something specific to the Taliban. It is a quality of the Ummah. And they don't have that, because they fight wars based on Excel spreadsheets, based on cost-benefit analysis. If it's going to cost too much for them, they're going to pack their bags and go home. So that's why we have an advantage over them.
Yes, and also, Professor Nidal, when one looks at leadership, and it's clear that when one looks at serving the Western agenda, or the narrow agenda that you spoke about earlier on, and the West is going to do everything in its power to stop any leader from arising, any leader who will serve the interests of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But looking at the Muslim Ummah at large, the reality has hit home. And the reality is these leaders have been horribly exposed. They have shown up for what they are at this point in time. And as Mazhar mentioned, spoke about betrayal and the betrayal of the Muslim Ummah. So they will do whatever they want. But at the end of the day, looking at the Muslim Ummah, it's a sleeping giant. They have tried, many of these leaders have tried to neutralize any form of opposition in the world. And we see what has happened with the Muslim Brotherhood, with the Ikhwan al-Muslimin. We know what has taken place in Egypt, what has happened with Sheikh Mohammed Morsi. And, right across the entire Arab world, any opposition to these leaders, they will obviously try to neutralize or even totally eliminate. But the Muslim Ummah is not sleeping, and I'm sure this has woken up a sleeping giant. If you could just unmute your mic, please, Professor Nidal.
Jazakallah khair, brother. This is very a good presentation of the situation as stands right now. In some of my mentorship courses, I try to teach people to think clearly and try to see things through all the smoke screens. And I often use the term that happiness, one of the definitions of happiness is clarity of thoughts. And I will try to seek some sort of clarity of looking at the situation that we have right now. I go back to the original point where there is Allah and His creation. Allah has created the existence that we have, and Allah knows best what's best for His creation. And then we have the creation, or the creatures who basically choose to go either Allah's way for their own best interest, or to try their own way, and in the process, of course, everybody suffers. To try to see things in that clear perspective, one sometimes needs to get out of the box and to see the world from, like, let's say, a perspective that's high above. What we have right now is we had a humanitarian or a humane project that was represented by the Islamic umbrella of governance, which is the Islamic State, until 100 years ago. And then that gave way for one reason or another, because of the weakness of Muslims, because Muslims did not appreciate the responsibility that they carry on their shoulder to serve humanity and the interests of the world where we live. Then we have to pay the price for basically neglecting our responsibility. Allah has soldiers. Those soldiers are not always Muslims and believers. Those soldiers can be the wind and the floods, or can be even non-Muslims sometimes, like the Zionists and the Americans and the Westerners and the Nazis and so on and so forth. Whenever things get on the wrong track, we need basically a wake-up call for us to wake up to our own responsibility and to assume that responsibility and to serve our purpose on this life, which is the universal good for ourselves and for everybody else. The world has tried the Muslim solution for 1400 years, and alhamdulillah, world has prospered, and we owe the civilization that we live today to the Muslim contribution throughout the ages that made the world, or that made the advancement of the human cause today in medicine, in science, in engineering, in everything, that Muslims take the greatest credit for, mostly for contributions that occurred because of the flourishing of science and civilization under the Muslim umbrella. Well, Muslims have been absent for 100 years. All of these advancements have been used against humanity and the human interest, because the people on charge of the world affairs today are people that do not have divine agenda. They have devious agenda in place to serve their greed or their capitalist interests, or whatever agenda, the ideological agenda or racist agenda they have. I think the world right now is waking up that man cannot be entrusted by running his own or her own affairs. People are looking for other solutions. China is or the communist model of China has not served the Chinese people and the welfare and the well-being of the Chinese people. The Soviet Union and the communism that they represented did not serve their interests. Capitalism in the West, in the US and in Europe right now, has not served their interests. The colonial and post-colonial regime in the Muslim world, in the Arab world, has not served the interests of those people. So, we have a vacuum. The vacuum that we've been having for the last 100 years is not the vacuum of quote-unquote Muslim leadership, is the vacuum of leadership, period. Because when the Muslim state was there, it was more or less as a police to the world, because the oppressed and the persecuted, they always had umbrella that they can run to, where they can get some sort of justice and equality. We find that people they fled, whether it's Christians, whether it's Buddhists, whoever it is, even Jews, they fled the persecution of their own religion, of their own sect, of their own people, to the justice of Islam and Muslims. That's the only way that humanity can be served. When we look at Jerusalem, and that's why I say, look at Palestine. Palestine is the focal point. Palestine is the mirror of world affairs. You go to Palestine right now, you see the mosque, and you see a couple of blocks away churches that predate those mosques, for sometimes 1,000 years or 700 years or 600 years. Those churches are still standing exactly at the same shape and content, and even being served by Muslim janitorial families that have served them because of the Umri Accord. Islam is the way to go. Islam is the way that Allah has prescribed to serve the interests of His creation. There's no two ways around it. I'm not saying that we need to have Muslim state everywhere. That's not what I'm trying to get to. But I'm saying that we all have a lot to learn from Islam and the Islamic solutions to whatever problem that we're facing today. Now, we had a virus a couple of years ago that basically brought the world to its knees. So we know that all of this human might and all of these arsenals and all of this power and the billionaire of such and the billionaire of such, with all of the wealth that they have, some little unseen creation can just bring everything down a split of a moment. When are we going to wake up to this reality that we have a limited time on earth to serve a purpose? And that purpose is not our bank accounts. It's not like, the mansions to live in or the vacations we fly to take. It is basically to serve our purpose in doing good to ourselves, doing good to others, doing good to families, doing good to the community at large and to humanity at large. Muslims understand this. Individually, we understand it because you can see Muslims excelling in every basically field or discipline all over the world. So as individuals, Muslims, they still have that mindfulness and awareness of their purpose on earth. Alhamdulillah, and they understand what Islamic identity means. Well, it's time that we try to put this together to try to offer Muslim solutions in the areas of politics, in the areas of governance, in the areas of world affairs, in the areas of global economy. We need Muslim solutions right now to take humanity from the misery that we're in. Otherwise, we're just going to have murders and killings and assassinations and like the chaos that the world is living in today. We look at Palestine. Palestine is the hope, and everything is going in that direction, inshallah. The day that Palestine is liberated, you're going to see that all of these problems are going to go away. And I expect actually that Palestine is going to be the capital. Not Jerusalem is not going to be the capital to Palestine. Islam is going to be the capital of the Muslim world and the new world, inshallah, upcoming.
Yes, I see there's quite a few comments that have come through, and we will go through those comments in a minute. But Mazhar, just looking at challenging the status quo that Professor Nidal speaks about, and we know Islam as a religion, as an ideology, as a way of life, is a challenge. Whether it's been a challenge to communism, whether it's been a challenge to the capitalist system, it is clear that Islam has been challenging the status quo. And once again, when we're talking about vacuum, and it's not only about a leadership vacuum, it's an intellectual vacuum in challenging the status quo.
No, absolutely, because Islam remains an ideological challenge to the West, and it always has been. So if you see the way they deal with the Muslims in the West, in Europe, they view them with a different lens. So why can't a woman wear hijab in certain capitals in Europe, in certain institutions in Europe? Because they see that something connected to their way of life, which they see as a threat to their way of life. And the reason they see Islam as a threat is, it's very important to understand this. The reason they see it as a threat. Now, if Islam was impractical, if Islam had nothing to offer, there's nothing for them to fear. But because capitalism has failed across the board in every country it's been in, the elite know that the only way they can maintain the status quo and to maintain their elite status is by keeping capitalism, quote unquote, democracy in place, because it allows their interests to be secured. So at the expense of what? At the expense of the majority of the people becoming poor. So Professor Nidal just alluded to the COVID virus. Now, when people across the world were dying from COVID, when millions of people were suffering and tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people died across the world, the few billionaires made more money than they had ever made in their entire history. So the billionaires were making even more billions, whilst the rest of the economies in the world were being impoverished. And nobody's pointing a finger at the structural problems of capitalism that allowed this to happen. So not only is it a fundamental economic problem where it sucks the wealth away from the majority to the few, that's the dynamic of capitalism in every country across the world, whether it's Pakistan or New York, America. Secondly, you have got a social chaos in the society. You've got social chaos where obviously you've got these gender problems where men don't know if they're women and women don't know if they're men. You've got this chaos that feeds into society, which is breaking down traditional relationships in society. So society is chaotic. And it's no surprise that there's an epidemic, you could say, of mental illnesses in the Western world. So across the most developed countries, the most richest economies in the world, you've got the greatest problem of mental health. And the simple reason for this is because humans are living their life in a way they were not designed to live. So they are going against their fitrah. Their expectations are not in line in what their real expectations are supposed to be for the purpose of this life. And this is causing them anxiety, causing them stress, and causing them mental problem. And this is just one aspect of capitalism, the economics, the society, but even the ecology, where they are raping the world in order to make a profit. All of this is happening. And Islam offers an alternative civilization. And Islam will rebalance. We're called the Ummatul Wasat because we are the balanced nation. We are the just nation. We will bring back a balance. We will bring back justice, which means the elite are going to lose. The majority are going to gain, whether they are non-Muslims, whether even if they are not Muslims, whether the animals or part of the ecology, trees and what have you, they are going to benefit by having Islamic system. It's the tiny 1% who are going to suffer when Islam comes, because the mechanism they use in order to make their wealth and to maintain their hegemony over the world will be removed. And it is they who are coming out with these CVE global agenda, this work against quote unquote violent extremism. It's not against violent extremism. It's not even against terrorism. It's against Islam. And we see that now with the shooting that happened in Buffalo. Nobody's talking about terrorism. Nobody's going to investigate which churches radicalized that guy. Nobody's going to look for the hate preachers which radicalized that guy. Nobody's going to arrest the family and friends and the school teachers of the guy who did the shooting in Buffalo. But when it's a Muslim, the mosques are investigated, the families are arrested, there's a lockdown, and every Muslim leader is forced to apologize, because subliminally they are making a link that violence is linked to Islam because they are scared of Islam. So yes, Islam is an ideological threat, and the West know it, the elite know it, but it's high time the Muslim ulama and the Muslim thinkers and the Muslim educated realize that we are the solution to the global problem that exists, and we have the solution in our hands, and we need to re-establish the Islamic world order, the Islamic civilization, in order to guide humanity from the many darknesses of socialism, capitalism, atheism, whatever ism you want to put there, to the one light of Islam. And it's our duty, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when he passed the message on to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam as a rahmatul lil alameen, we have inherited that cause, we have inherited that agenda and program, and we have to fulfill it. That's the objective of a Muslim in this world, is to fulfill and complete the work of Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, is to establish Islam and convey it to the four corners of the world. And that is what we need to talk to the Muslim Ummah about, of re-establishing the Islamic civilization as a unified global order, as a means of guidance and salvation for the rest of humanity.
Jazakallah khairan for that. And obviously there have been certain comments that have been coming through, and we will be playing them. Afzal Dur Muhammad says the reality is that the Arab leaders are actually Zionists instilled there by the colonial powers. That is just one of the comments that's come through. Jazakallah. There are a few more. The Crusades that started in 1096 never ended. The collapse of the Ottoman Empire was by design, not chance, so that the Zionist West could take control of the Muslim world, which they have done. What we have in the middle is a federation of Zionist states made up of occupied Palestine, Saudi, the Gulf states, Jordan, Egypt, Morocco, and Sudan. The Muslim Ummah is on the back door at the moment. Professor Nidal, would you like to comment? And here's a question: can an Islamic political order be brought into existence today by the secular Muslim nation states?
Okay, I really care less for the secular states, because they're not states. They're basically, just like we said, they're just some creation by the enemies of this ummah, and they have proved to be total failure, and they're not even worth wasting a breath talking about them. What's at stake right now is the responsibility, and for us to live to the moment and to be up to it. We know that for years past, they were looking at Muslims and trying to present Muslims as evil, terrorist, global threat, and so forth. Now they have actually come around and they said, well, you know what, actually, it is racism, and it is everything else. And now Muslims have been exonerated in some ways. I go back to as Muslims, the challenge that we are always faced with is to live up to what being a Muslim. We don't care what people call us. We care what Allah sees when Allah looks at us. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has entrusted us with a responsibility that we have to live up to, and we are held accountable whether we keep that responsibility or live up to that responsibility or not. Allah has requested or asked of us as Muslims as to set the model for everyone on how to live their life, how to live a good life, and how to serve their own, like the best interest of their own. Muslims so far, I see, especially like in the West and even in their home countries, they are not living up to the responsibility of being a Muslim. When are we going to wake up to the reality that we are on this earth for a number of years to serve Allah's purpose and to make sure that this world is the best place that can ever be for anybody? You know, as Muslims in the West right now, they have no more excuses to try to keep portraying the mediocre models some of them show in being like greedy and in mistreating people and being con artists. And some of them, now I'm not saying that most Muslims are like that, but there are quite few Muslims that are basically presenting a very unhealthy example to what Muslims should be. The same thing in our home countries. It is time that right now to understand what being a Muslim is, the role and the purpose that we have individually and as a family and as a group and as a society, and to live up to that, to what Allah is expecting of us. We have to be the best model that we can be to ourselves, to our own children, to our own families, to our own societies, and to the country and the world at large. When we do that, only when we do that, Muslims will start looking up to Muslims, or the world would start looking up to Muslims that they have always done throughout the Islamic history. They would look to Muslims for solutions and to try to take them out of the misery that we're in. And even in Palestine, by the way, even there are some Israelis, some Jews that went to Palestine, and when they saw the injustice done to the Palestinians, and when they saw the extraordinary human model Palestinians represent, some of them are even like turned against Israel, and some of them have even became Muslims and empathize with the Palestinians. We have to present that model of the best that we can ever be anywhere, in any environment, in any country, in any society. Only by doing this, we are living up to being Muslims. We have no more excuses. We have to live up to what Allah has asked of us.
Yes, Jazakallah for that, Professor Nidal. And Mazhar, I don't know if you'd like to comment on any of the comments that came through from the brother.
Yes, about secular states becoming an Islamic state. Look, the secular states are false states. Islamic state is going to emerge, because it's the promise of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when he said Khilafah min haj al-nabuwa, the Khilafah will return based on the prophethood. So that's a done deal. It's not a case of if, it's just a matter of when. But what we need to do is we need to liberate ourselves from an inferiority complex, and we need to liberate ourselves from cowardice, because we become our worst enemies. The non-Muslims can only have power over us if we allow them to have it. If we don't allow them to have it, they can't. So we need to re-embrace the Islamic mindset and the Islamic viewpoint. So yes, the Islamic State is going to emerge. That's not a question. But we've got so many examples in our history to show that cowardice leads to occupation and humiliation. And you need leaders with vision and courage to take the ummah out of that. Not wait for the whole ummah to become perfect. That's never going to happen. So when you look at Salah ad-Din, the Crusaders had been in Jerusalem for 100 years. But because Salah ad-Din wasn't a coward, and because Salah ad-Din didn't have an inferiority complex, he made it happen. He planned to unify the ummah. And then after 1 or 2 battles, he liberated Masjid al-Aqsa from the Crusaders. If you look at the mighty Mongols, they ransacked the entire Middle East, and the Muslims used to quake. And there are some, there may be exaggerated claims, but there are some claims in the history books that if a Mongol woman said to a man, sit here, I'm going to come back and kill you later, he would sit there out of fear, and she would come back and kill him later in the day. That's the kind of fear the Mongols spread across the Arab world. But when they came to Egypt, to conquer Egypt, and they sent their ambassadors there to tell the Egyptian to surrender, it was Amir Qutuz who slaughtered the envoys, and Amir Qutuz, who launched a jihad against the Mongols and finished the occupation of the Middle East and put them into retreat to such an extent that these people eventually embraced Islam themselves and carried Islam to the eastern part of the world. And that's when the Mughal Empire in India is from the descendants of the Mughals that occupied the Middle East. So they ended up becoming Muslims because we have people like Salahuddin, and we have people like Amir Qutuz who showed us that you need to show courage when everybody else shows cowardice. You need to have hope when there is hopelessness, and you need to have a vision to unite the ummah. And we've seen this happen previously. And those people who are going to do the same again, those who want to unify the ummah today, bring about a unity of the ummah, and they have courage and they have optimism and they rely on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Indeed, these are the people that will of surety bring the ummah out of the darkness and bring the light back and fulfill the promise of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala of establishing the Khilafah min Hajj al-Nabuwah and complete the title of the Prophet Rahmatul lil Alameen by taking Islam to the four corners of the world. This is going to happen. The only question is, do you want to be a part of that and take a part, play a part in the destiny that has already been written? Or do you want to be pessimistic? Do you want to be a coward? And do you want to stand on the sidelines as a spectator? That's the only choice we have to make.
Jazakallah for that. And I see we've got about 4 minutes as we head towards the end of the broadcast this evening. And also, Professor Nidal, earlier on, you spoke about Palestine, and you spoke about Palestine being the future. And Brother Mazhar spoke about inferiority complex and cowardice. Now, we know for well over 70 years, cowardice is not in the DNA of the people of Palestine. And that is the reason why I suppose, you make this point that they've taught the Muslim Ummah a lesson of resistance, a lesson of courage, a lesson of bravery. And I'm sure that obviously is in the back of your mind as well, Professor Nidal, when we're talking about Palestine, the hope and the future of the Muslim Ummah.
In Palestine, when the brother Yahya al-Sinwar in Gaza, or Sheikh Ra'id Salah in al-Fahm, or any place, when we talk about conquering the Zionist evil, we're not doing it for Palestine, we're not doing it for the Palestinians, we're not doing it for Muslims, we're doing it for the humanity at large. We're ridding humanity of one of the worst and filthiest hotbeds of injustice, of racism, of everything that's wrong. Palestine is the land of peace. Palestine is the land that Allah has chosen. And its people have been designated by Prophet Muhammad as the victorious people. We are guardians over the human interest. We are guardians over the interest of humanity at large. Those people in Palestine, when they go out and with their bare chest, sacrificing their lives and being very happy to do it, they're not doing it for any worldly interest. They're setting the example to how we should live our life, how should we stand for what we believe in, and what we believe in because we are at peace, that this is what Allah has entrusted us with, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is happy for what we do and is content and satisfied for the price that we are paying for being his servants. Keep an eye on Palestine because Palestine is the future. And no matter what happened in Palestine over the last 100 years, it will bear fruit, inshallah, and the world will see it. And eventually, just like all Muslims are looking up to Palestine, the entire humanity will start gradually looking up to Palestine, and Palestine is the solution. It's not going to be long. It's going to be a matter of few numbered, inshallah, years before humanity at large gets a break, inshallah.
Inshallah. Yes, Brother Mazhar, we are obviously heading towards closure. In a minute or two, just some final thoughts.
Yeah, just echo some of the things that have already been said, that, we are an ummah of courage and an ummah of hope. And it's in the dark days and times when there is hopelessness, it's the job of the Muslim leaders and the Muslim khatibs to give hope to the ummah. And, we think about the Ghazwa Khandaq, when the munafiq couldn't even go, used to spread so much fear amongst the Muslims to say, we can't even go to the toilet, there's so much fear, and you're seeing these big dreams of conquering Rome and Istanbul and these countries. It's at these times of darkness and hopelessness when we need to give hope, because the good days are going to come. Rasulullah has promised this. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has promised this through his messenger, even to the point that he said, when the Khilafah comes back and when the capital reaches Al-Quds, nobody will be able to shift it. So the final resting place, the final resting place of the capital of the Islamic Ummah will be the first Qibla. So the first Qibla started in Al-Quds, then the Qibla shifted to Makkah and Medina. The capital of the Islamic State started in Medina, but it will finish in Al-Quds, the place of the first Qibla. So it's something to be hopeful about, something to be optimistic about, and something to commit our lives, our money, and our efforts to helping the Islamic cause, to work with groups that are working to revive and re-establish the unity of the Ummah by establishing the Khilafah Rashida. So my appeal to the people is to look into this and help the Ummah.
Jazakallah khairan for that. And I see Jamil has sent a message saying the only way the world will see Islam as an example is through implementation of Islam. No one is going to look up to us based on individuals behaving badly. When human beings live under a system, it impacts behavior. Therefore, all talk of good Muslims in a non-Muslim society en masse, then why do we need an Islamic system? Professor Nidal, just some final thoughts from you before we end the broadcast this evening.
When we talk about the Islamic system, we're talking about way of life. That way of life is on the individual level, but it's also on the society and institutional level. We need an umbrella where the Islamic laws are implemented. And when I say Islamic laws, I'm not talking about criminal justice code. We're talking about like human beings. They're imperfect. They tend they need guidance. They need direction. They need regulation. And that's where the Islamic umbrella comes in. Not to control people, not to punish people, not to try to take freedoms away. It's just basically to make sure that everybody's right and interest is served without excess, and where private interests and public interests are both served equally, and where people like live their the rights that they are entitled to. We are all entitled to rights, to freedoms, to our properties, to our dignity. All of these are taken away from us. Only Islam, by example, by proof, by historical evidence, only Islam has been able to preserve all of these rights and all of these dignities and the quality of life for all, Muslims and non-Muslims. And that's why Islam is the solution, not to Muslims, but to everybody else, to existence, to creation, to the world that we live in.
Well, Jazakallah khairan to you, Professor Nidal, and also to your brother Mazhar Khan. We do appreciate both of you taking time out and being part of this broadcast this evening here on Salam Media. We wish you well. Allah accept your efforts. Allah reward your efforts as well. Allah keep you safe. And more importantly, the wonderful work that both of you are doing in the service of the Muslim Ummah at large. Allah accept and reward your efforts. Jazakallah once again. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa barakatuh. Pleasure to be with you, brother.
Yes, Professor Nidal, Sakr and Mazhar Khan joining us out of the United Kingdom on this topic, the evolving leadership across the ages, looking at the Muslim world. We were focusing quite a bit on the Middle East, but we know that this is a universal problem. This is a global problem as far as the Muslim world is concerned. And we've been talking about vacuums. In more ways than one, intellectual vacuum is one that is needed. But I think more importantly, at the end of the day, our purpose, and as both Brother Mazhar Khan and Professor Nidal articulated so well, that Islam is a justice-based religion and an ideology. And more importantly, we are united in our interests in serving the purpose of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that is the reason why we are here. But I think more importantly, again, just to unpack some of these issues, looking at the leadership in the Muslim world at this point in time leaves much to be desired. And the future lies with the Muslim Ummah at large. The future lies with people like myself and yourself, the people on the ground. The future lies with the courageous, the brave Palestinians who have withstood oppression for well over 70 years and have stood up to the most brutal occupation, a Zionist occupation. And at the end of the day, as Brother Mazhar mentioned, the first Qibla started in Al-Quds, and we know when we look at the end times as well, this is where it's going to end. So as Professor Nidal also mentioned, the future is going to be Palestine. And with that, I'm going to be signing off once again. It's been an absolute pleasure being in the company of our viewers, our listeners. So we thank you for tuning in, for listening to us, for viewing us, and also your comments that have come through. We request your du'as from myself and the team. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi.